Welcome to Beneath the Noise. Spoilers ahead for David Fincher movies and Chuck Palahniuk books, but I will try to keep it minimal. If you've ever watched a David Fincher film, you know the feeling of slow burning tension, of details that seem insignificant until suddenly they aren't. Fincher crafts his stories with the precision of a surgeon. Every scene meticulously framed. Every movement intentional. Every moment tightening like a noose around the characters until they suffocate under their own obsessions. And if you've ever read Chuck Palahniuk, you know the exact opposite feeling. Chaos, disorder. A relentless descent into grotesque absurdity. His writing is like a sucker punch, unpredictable and nauseating, dragging readers through the underbelly of society with characters who, more often than not, would burn the whole world down just to see what would happen next. One crafts worlds of control, the other, stories of destruction. And yet, they meet at a crossroads of some of the same ideas. Power, masculinity, identity, self-destruction, and the sick ways we entertain ourselves. The illusion of control in a chaotic world. They don't tell the same stories, but they tell stories that feel like they belong in the same world. And nowhere is that more obvious than Fight Club. So today, we're diving into the minds of David Fincher and Chuck Palahniuk, two storytellers obsessed with the darkest corners of human nature. How do they explore power, obsession, self-destruction? And why do their stories, despite being told through different mediums, leave us with the same uneasy feeling that maybe, just maybe, we're all a little closer to unraveling than we'd like to admit? If you only know of David Fincher and Chuck Palahniuk from the internet, you probably have the wrong idea about them. Both are victims of misinterpretation, of being absorbed into the cultural lexicon in ways that often miss the entire point. Their work is quoted, idolized, and misunderstood, sometimes by the very people their stories are warning us about. Let's start with the biggest misconception of them all. The idea that Fight Club is some hyper-masculine manifesto for male rebellion. I'm sure you've seen it. Guys who treat Tyler Durden like some self-help guru, quoting, "We're the middle children of history," or, "It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything," as if he's some aspirational figure instead of a walking red flag with abs. But here's the catch. Tyler Durden is the villain. He isn't a prophet of freedom. He's a manipulative, toxic ideology given flesh. Chuck Palahniuk's entire point in Fight Club is that the narrator is seduced by a violent, radical movement because he's deeply lost and vulnerable. Tyler offers him an answer that feels empowering, but it's just another form of control. We will dive deeper into this further into the episode, but for now, I strive to make a simple point. When you see Fight Club treated like a bro Bible, just know it's not the film or the book that's the problem. It's how people are choosing to engage with it. Then there's David Fincher, who somehow gained a reputation as a detached clinical filmmaker, as if he's some sort of emotionalist director who makes sick nihilistic thrillers. That couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, Fincher is precise. Yes, he's a notorious perfectionist who takes 50 shots of the same scene. Yes, his films have a dark, cerebral quality. But he's not cold. He's meticulously attuned to human behavior. The Social Network is not just a movie about Facebook. It is a Shakespearean tragedy about loneliness and obsession. Zodiac is not just a true crime story. It is about how obsession devours people from the inside out. Even Gone Girl, a film that could have easily been a straightforward thriller, is laced with sharp, biting satire about media, relationships, and performative gender roles. I like to think and believe that Fincher's coldness, quote-unquote, is actually deep empathy disguised as detachment. He doesn't spoon-feed emotions to the audience. He lets them fester beneath the surface, quietly suffocating both the characters and us. Then there's Palahniuk, who people love to dismiss as a shock value edgelord writer. Yes, his books are gross. Yes, they feature horrifying, stomach-churning moments, but he's not just trying to shock you for the hell of it. His work has a point. People forget that Fight Club is a deeply philosophical book about consumerism, identity, and modern disillusionment. They reduce Choke to the sex addict novel, when really it's about cycles of trauma, control, and self-sabotage. They dismiss Haunted, one of my personal favorites, as a collection of grotesque horror stories, ignoring that there's a commentary on how people exploit their suffering for attention and profit. Palahniuk uses extremity to make a point. His stories are shocking because life is shocking. His characters don't indulge in chaos for fun. They're trapped in a society that has already robbed them of meaning, and their grotesque actions are the only way they know how to respond. Fincher and Palahniuk don't create guides to life. They create warnings. Their work is not aspirational, it is cautionary. If you walk away from Fight Club thinking, I want to be Tyler Durden, you have missed the point. If you think Fincher's films are cold and empty, you haven't looked closely enough at the people suffering in them. Both artists hold up a mirror to our worst impulses, asking, are you really seeing the reflection? Or are you just admiring the image you want to see? David Fincher and Chuck Palahniuk construct their stories in fundamentally different ways, yet both create a sense of unease, inevitability, and psychological entrapment. Fincher's films tend to follow a structured, deliberate narrative. Every scene, every shot, and every cut is intentional, building tension methodically. His storytelling isn't just about what happens, it's about how the audience feels trapped in a web of inevitability. His most Fincher-esque narratives, Seven, Zodiac, and The Social Network, build dread by making us feel like passengers in a machine that has already determined our fate. Seven plays like a Greek tragedy. Everything's set up to push Detective Mills to his breaking point, and the audience watches helplessly as it unfolds. Zodiac traps us in an investigation that doesn't have a satisfying resolution. The characters and the audience are doomed to chase a mystery that will never give them closure. The Social Network follows a rise and fall structure, where Zuckerberg, much like a Shakespearean tragic hero, ends up imprisoned in the empire he built. Fincher often works with closed-loop storytelling, meaning he tells stories that feel like they've been set in motion before we even arrived. And by the end, the trap has sprung shut. And if Fincher constructs a maze, Palahniuk builds a house of mirrors. His novels play with fractured chronology, unreliable narration, and nonlinear structure, mirroring the psychological chaos his protagonists experience. Fight Club intentionally keeps the reader disoriented, jumping between disjointed memories, monologue, and second-person instructions like, you are not your job, you are not your fucking khakis. Invisible Monsters is told out of order, jumping between time frames so that the reader experiences the protagonist's identity breakdown as it happens, rather than in a straightforward arc. Diary, as implied by the name, is structured as a literal journal, creating an artificial sense of control that slowly unravels as the protagonist realizes she's trapped in a larger system. Palahniuk embraces aesthetic chaos in his writing structure. His prose isn't just about what happens, but how it feels to be stuck inside his protagonist's crumbling psyche. Let's dive deeper into each artist and how they use story structure and their particular mediums in some of their most famous works. David Fincher is a director who we have established thrives on control and precision, both in his filmmaking process and in the themes of his films. His movies are obsessively detailed, rigidly constructed, and emotionally suffocating at times, often putting his characters in a game they can't quite win. Let's look at 3 films that embody this signature style. In Seven, Fincher presents us with a world where logic and reason are rendered useless in the face of absolute chaos. Detectives Somerset and Mills chase a killer who isn't just committing murders, he's crafting a moral statement. A brutal manifesto that follows its own twisted rules. Somerset, the weary realist, understands that the world is beyond saving, while Mills clings to the idea that justice and order must prevail. The film's gut-punching ending cements one of Fincher's greatest themes. You can't outthink the chaos. You are at its mercy. Next, on the surface, Panic Room is about a mother and daughter trapped in a high-tech fortress built within their home. But beneath that, it's a story about how the spaces we construct for our safety are never truly safe. Jodie Foster's character builds her entire world around security, planning, and meticulous control. All things that crumble the second the unexpected happens. It's classic Fincher. The more you try to create order, the more inevitable its collapse. And third, The Social Network. David Fincher's The Social Network is on the surface a movie about the creation of Facebook. But beneath its tech industry origins, it is a film about power, obsession, and the illusion of control, making it perhaps the most Fincher-esque story in his entire filmography. Mark Zuckerberg, played by Jesse Eisenberg, is the perfect Fincher protagonist. Brilliant, obsessive, socially detached, and wholly convinced that he is the smartest person in every room. Like many of Fincher's characters, he is a man who believes that if he just thinks 5 moves ahead, and if he just outmaneuvers his competitors, he can control the outcome. But the great irony of The Social Network is that Zuckerberg wins the game he was trying to play and still loses everything that mattered in the process. Much like Somerset in Seven or Robert Graysmith in Zodiac, Zuckerberg is trapped in an obsessive pursuit that consumes him. His goal isn't just to build a website, it's to cement his place at the top of a social hierarchy that has always rejected him. Every decision he makes is calculated for maximum efficiency and control. From cutting out Eduardo Saverin, played by Andrew Garfield, to ensuring Facebook remains exclusive just long enough to make it feel desirable. But what makes The Social Network so devastating is that Fincher doesn't just show us Zuckerberg's rise to power. He makes us feel the cold emptiness of it. The final scene, where Zuckerberg sits alone, refreshing his ex-girlfriend's Facebook profile, is Fincher's version of a horror movie ending. Zuckerberg is the undisputed king of social networking, but he is utterly disconnected from real human relationships. The irony is suffocating. He has built the ultimate tool of connection, yet he's never been more alone. Fincher constructs the social network with the same precision that Zuckerberg applies to his algorithms. Every shot is meticulous. Every cut is deliberate, reinforcing the film's icy, analytical tone. The film is bathed in a cold, blue-tinged color scheme, reinforcing the emotional detachment and digital sterility. Zuckerberg exists in a world of glowing screens and sterile dorm rooms, never truly connecting to anything warm or human. Fincher also creates what's called the glass cage effect, framing Zuckerberg in reflections, glass windows, and isolated compositions, visually reinforcing that he is separated from the world around him. Some of the most striking moments come from when he is in the deposition room, surrounded by lawyers, yet emotionally untouchable. And not to mention Aaron Sorkin's machine gun dialogue. While Sorkin's script moves at a breakneck pace, Fincher contrasts it with deliberate, methodical editing. The rapid-fire dialogue gives the illusion of control, but Fincher's restrained direction strips the emotion from it, making Zuckerberg's words feel clinical and calculated. One of the most powerful emotional beats in The Social Network comes when Eduardo confronts Mark after realizing he's been cut out of the company. His now iconic outburst, "You better lawyer up, asshole, 'cause I'm not coming back for 30%. I'm coming back for everything." It's a rare explosion of real emotion in a film that is otherwise defined by cold calculation. Eduardo is the last real human connection that Mark has, and cutting him out, Mark ensures that his empire is entirely his own, but at the cost of having no one left to share it with. The scene is devastating because it plays out like a breakup, not a business decision. Eduardo is not just losing money, he's losing his best friend, and Mark doesn't even seem to care. By the end of The Social Network, Mark has achieved everything he set out to accomplish. A billion-dollar empire. He has outmaneuvered everyone who has ever tried to stop him, and he is the most powerful man in the digital world. And yet, the final image of the film, Zuckerberg, sitting alone, refreshing Erica Albright's Facebook page. It's one of the most haunting endings in modern cinema. Fincher lingers on the shot, allowing the audience to sit in the emptiness of his victory. The slow fade to black, accompanied by the Beatles' "Baby, You're a Rich Man," adds a cruel irony. Yes, he's rich, but at what cost? The unanswered friend request is the perfect metaphor. Zuckerberg has built the world's largest social network, but he cannot bridge the one relationship he truly cares about. Unlike Fight Club, where the narrator embraces destruction, or Seven, where Detective Mills falls into a carefully laid trap, Zuckerberg's fate in The Social Network is basically self-inflicted. His obsession with control ensures that he achieves everything except for the one thing he truly wanted: human connection. If The Social Network was directed by anyone else, it might have come out as a triumph of the nerd success story, but in Fincher's hands, it became a slow, burning psychological horror film about isolation, power, and the empty pursuit of control. Where Fincher is surgical, Palahniuk is unhinged. His writing thrives on shock, satire, and the grotesque, breaking apart traditional storytelling structures in favor of fragmented, unreliable narratives. If Fincher's characters are trapped in systems, Palahniuk's characters burn those systems to the ground and dance in their ashes. Palahniuk's Invisible Monsters follows a former model who, after a tragic accident, reinvents herself entirely. The novel dissects beauty, identity, and self-destruction, unraveling how much of our personalities are constructed and how easy they are to abandon. Like in The Social Network, there's a sense of reinvention that doesn't lead to freedom. It leads to isolation. The more the protagonist sheds her old self, the more she loses any real sense of who she is. And Diary, one of Palahniuk's most unsettling novels, a slow burn horror story about a woman who finds herself reliving the same cycles of exploitation over and over. It plays with the idea of destiny versus free will, much like Seven. If the world is designed to break you, do you ever really have a choice? The protagonist, Misty, spirals into madness, much like Fincher's detectives and tech geniuses, realizing too late that she was never in control to begin with. If The Social Network is a cold, calculated tragedy of a man who thinks he can control everything, but loses himself in the process, Choke is its extremely sleazy, grimy cousin, a story about a man who embraces chaos, scams his way through life, and clings to destruction because it's the only thing he knows. Where Fincher's characters delude themselves into thinking they have control, Palahniuk's characters know they don't, so they make a game out of it. Choke is one of Palahniuk's most underrated novels, a darkly comic, grotesque satire about control, addiction, and identity. The story follows Victor Mancini, a sex addict and colonial reenactor who makes his living by pretending to choke in fancy restaurants, conning wealthy patrons into saving him so they feel responsible for his life and send him money. Meanwhile, he struggles with his dying mother's cryptic past, a doctor who may or may not have the answers, and his own self-destruction. Like Fight Club, Choke explores how we manipulate, deceive, and surrender to chaos, just with more scamming and more sex. Victor is a man without real agency, someone whose entire existence revolves around manipulating others for survival. But rather than feeling empowered by his ability to control people's reactions, he's trapped in a nihilistic cycle where even his scams begin to feel hollow. His choking grift is the perfect metaphor for his life. He pretends to be helpless so strangers will invest in him, saving him over and over again. And his sex addiction, it isn't about pleasure. It's about control and escape. Like many Palahniuk protagonists, he uses bodily destruction as a coping mechanism, much like the self-inflicted pain in Fight Club or the obsessive rituals in Diary. Victor also works at a historical reenactment site where his entire job is to pretend to be someone else, mirroring his identity crisis throughout the novel. Victor is essentially a Palahniuk protagonist in his purest form, addicted to self-destruction, deeply unreliable and morally ambiguous, lost in a system designed to keep him powerless, and a man who has given up on meaning but still clings to the idea of escape. But Choke isn't just sleazy satire. It's a novel that at its core is about the fear of being seen for who you really are. One of the biggest forces in Victor's life is his mother, who is slowly deteriorating in a hospital due to dementia. Throughout the novel, Victor's identity crisis is tied directly to his mother's control over him. She kidnapped him repeatedly as a child, shaping his distrust in authority and his compulsive need for independence. Her letters are cryptic, possibly meaningless, yet Victor still clings to them as if they contain some grand revelation about who he is. She implied that Victor is the second coming of Christ, setting up one of Palahniuk's most brilliantly absurd subplots. Does Victor have some great destiny? Or is he just another lost, broken person looking for meaning? Victor's relationship with his mother mirrors Fight Club's take on masculinity. He's a man caught in between who he thinks he is and who he thinks the world wants him to be. But in Choke, Palahniuk leans even harder into the Oedipal Freudian nightmare of it all, making Victor's crisis feel both existential and darkly funny. And like in most Palahniuk novels, Choke isn't a straightforward story. It's told in broken pieces, bouncing between Victor's childhood memories, present-day hospital visits, his sex addiction meetings, and restaurant choking scams. Much like Invisible Monsters, the fractured storytelling reflects Victor's fractured psyche. He has no real sense of self, and the novel makes the reader feel just as immured as he does. Like Fight Club, Choke relies heavily on repetition, punchy sentences, and a sarcastic, nihilistic tone. Short, clipped phrases mimic obsessive thoughts. Repetition of mantras, similar to Fight Club's "you are not your job," and brutally honest, grotesque descriptions. The writing itself feels like a con, fast-talking, aggressive, and leading you one way before taking you another. And if Palahniuk is infamous for ambiguous, darkly ironic endings, Choke delivers in full. Victor never really gets any real answers. His scam, his sex addictions, and his identity crisis don't lead to some grand revelation. And does he ever escape the cycle? Or does he just embrace it? Palahniuk, as always, leaves the reader suspended in uncertainty. Where The Social Network ends with Zuckerberg trapped in self-inflicted isolation, Choke ends with Victor floating in a world that doesn't care about his scams, his past, or his existential crisis. If Zuckerberg is the prisoner of his own empire, Victor is the man who never built anything real in the first place. The Social Network is about a man who destroys his personal life in pursuit of control, and Choke is about a man who destroys himself for the sake of survival, and still feels empty afterwards. Zuckerberg is a man who builds a system to escape his powerlessness, but becomes trapped inside of it. And Victor Mancini is a man who embraces powerlessness, but uses it as a weapon to manipulate others. Both are deeply lonely characters who struggle with their self-worth, but Fincher gives us a tragically cold precision, while Palahniuk gives us grotesque satire of human weakness. Ultimately, neither of them escape their cycles, because in both Fincher and Palahniuk's worlds, control is just another illusion. What makes these two creators so compelling isn't just their themes, but the way they explore them. Fincher's films ask, what happens if you try to control the chaos? While Palahniuk's books ask, what happens if you surrender to it? Fincher's world is one where control is an illusion, but it's an illusion that characters fight desperately to maintain. His protagonists are often intelligent, obsessive, and deeply meticulous, believing that if they just work hard enough, if they just plan everything down to the last detail, they can outmaneuver the chaos that threatens to consume them. Sounds familiar? But Fincher's great trick is revealing that this belief itself is the trap, that no one can fully master the uncontrollable. Palahniuk, on the other hand, strips his characters of their illusions from the very beginning. His protagonists don't believe they have control. They know they don't. They aren't fighting the chaos. They're embracing it, chasing it, sometimes even manufacturing it for themselves. Invisible Monsters gives us a protagonist who has already been shattered, losing any grip on what she was supposed to be. Her response isn't to rebuild a life of control, but to abandon the idea of identity altogether. To transform herself again and again until there's nothing left to hold on to. Both Fincher and Palahniuk leave their characters in cages of their own making, but the difference is how those cages are built. And then there's Fight Club, the ultimate collision of these two visions of chaos. Tyler Durden in the novel is the embodiment of Palahniuk's brand of anarchy. He believes that to be truly free, you have to burn everything down. He offers liberation through destruction, self-actualization through obliteration. The narrator, however, still clings to the illusion of structure, believing that if he follows Tyler's philosophy correctly, he can somehow build something better. But Tyler doesn't want to build. He only wants to destroy. Fincher's adaptation makes a crucial shift. It leans into the power of aesthetic control, drafting a version of Tyler that is too cool, too composed, and too controlled. It's a trap for the audience. Tyler's message is seductive, but Fincher makes us question if even the seductive clarity is just another kind of manipulation. The narrator, whether in the book or in the film, is trapped between two worlds. One of self-destruction as freedom, and one of self-destruction as annihilation. And he never fully gets to choose which side he's on. I remember when I first saw Fight Club in early high school. I was 13, mentally ill as all fuck, and looking for any sense of control in my own chaotic hell of a brain. I went into Fight Club blind. No spoilers, no hints, no cultural osmosis slowly seeping its way into my brain beforehand. Just me, a DVD I probably shouldn't have been watching late at night, and the gradual, creeping realization that everything I thought I understood about this movie was a lie. When the twist hit, that Tyler Durden wasn't real, that the narrator had been fighting himself the entire time, it was like my brain physically shifted inside of my skull. It was that moment, that click, when a story doesn't just surprise you, it fundamentally alters the way you process narratives altogether. I rewound the Netflix DVD. Then I rewound it again. Did they really just do that? It wasn't just the reveal itself. It was how Fincher built it so seamlessly into the DNA of the film that once you knew, you couldn't unsee it. Every frame, every interaction, every moment I had taken at face value suddenly mutated into something else. Scenes that once felt ordinary now pulsed with eerie, impossible tension. The flashes of Tyler. The way the characters never quite looked at him. The bar scene. The handshake. The missing luggage. I remember sitting there, heart pounding, feeling like my entire understanding of storytelling had just evolved. Like some secret layer of film analysis had just been unlocked in my brain. I wanted to talk to someone about it immediately, but it was past midnight and nobody was awake. So instead I just sat there, staring at the credits rolling, wondering how the hell I was supposed to sleep after that. And that's maybe why it stuck with me so much, years later, when my own reality started to break apart. And in Fight Club, when the narrator realizes the truth, he tries to fight it, to reclaim control. I wish it had been that easy. I used to think Fight Club was a movie about liberation, about breaking free. But after coming out of the other side of my own unraveling, I realize it's about the danger of giving in to a seductive delusion. The beauty of destruction is a trap. And once you start seeing the world that way, it's hard to stop. Fincher and Palahniuk often feel like they exist on opposite sides of my brain. Like my personal angel and devil. Or maybe just two equally unhinged people permanently stationed on my shoulders, whispering conflicting messages in my ear. Fincher is the voice of methodical obsession, one telling me to analyze every detail, stay 3 steps ahead, to believe that if I just tighten my grip on reality hard enough, I can keep everything from slipping through my fingers. Palahniuk, on the other hand, is the voice of chaotic liberation, laughing at my need for control, reminding me that nothing is permanent, that structure is a joke, and that if I let go, I might actually be free. Both leave us unsettled. Both create worlds that feel a little too much like our own. More than any other project, Fight Club is the place where Fincher and Palahniuk's worldviews collide and contradict each other. Palahniuk wants to explode the system. Fincher wants to dissect it under a microscope. Both lead us to the same place, staring into the abyss of what it means to be human, wondering whether they're the ones in control or just the passengers in someone's story. At its core, the entire discussion, Fincher versus Palahniuk, control versus chaos, precision versus destruction, it's a mental health story. Because what are Fincher's and Palahniuk's work really about? Obsession, identity, self-destruction, the need for control, and what happens when our minds turn against us? These aren't just themes. They're lived experiences of so many people who struggle with mental health. Fincher's characters are trapped in obsessive cycles, believing that if they just analyze, strategize, or work hard enough, they can master the chaos of their own lives. Relatable? Palahniuk's characters surrender to the chaos, diving headfirst into self-destruction as a means to escape. Also relatable. And isn't that exactly what it feels like to live inside of an anxious, depressed, neurodivergent brain? For a long time, I felt like my brain was both a Fincher protagonist and a Palahniuk protagonist at the same time. Some days I was stuck in Zuckerberg mode, obsessively trying to control my reality, convinced that if I just organized my life perfectly, my brain wouldn't betray me. Other days, I feel like Victor Mancini or a Tyler Durden follower, spiraling into self-destruction, because if nothing matters, why not lean into it? And then in 2018, when I experienced psychosis, my reality fractured entirely. I lived through my own Fight Club twist, except it wasn't cinematic or poetic. It was terrifying. It was what happens when your brain hijacks itself, when the thing that's supposed to keep you tethered to reality suddenly can't be trusted. So why talk about Fincher and Palahniuk? Why do they matter in a mental health space? Because they both ask the same question that many of us face when dealing with mental illness. Do we try to control the chaos? Or do we surrender to it? I think the answer, or at least the healthiest one, is neither. Because both extremes are traps. Fincher's world teaches us that control is an illusion, that no matter how many steps ahead we try to think, life is unpredictable. But Palahniuk's world reminds us that pure anarchy is not freedom. It's just another kind of prison. Mental health, real healing, exists somewhere in between. It's about learning to live with the chaos without letting it define us. It's about finding meaning without forcing everything to make sense. It's about realizing that we are not our diagnosis, our compulsions, or our worst impulses. Fincher's characters lose themselves in the pursuit of control. Palahniuk's characters lose themselves by giving it up entirely. The real goal, the actual mental health takeaway, is learning not to lose yourself at all. So maybe the real lesson here isn't about control or chaos. Maybe it's about learning to exist in the messiness of reality itself. Thank you for listening. You can email us at beneaththenoisepodcast@gmail.com. My name is Emily Yatsko. I hope you join us next time.